Good morning, everybody. Now, there is no doubt for most of us that Keir Starmer is the worst Prime Minister in living memory. And every week or almost every day, he does something to make things even worse for this country and the people living in it. This week, he has promised to give £3 billion per year to the Zelensky regime in Ukraine. That will be given in the form of financial aid and military aid to keep the slaughter going on the front lines between Ukraine and Russia in the war that's going on there. A war that has got nothing to do with this country or the people in this country, and that we certainly shouldn't be giving money to prolong. It's a dreadful war in terms of the number of good young men, Ukrainian and Russian, on both sides who are dying in conditions that are pretty much like the horrible trenches in the First World War. I mean, this is trench warfare, and it needs to stop. But Starmer isn't stopping it. He's spaffing away more of our money, not just for 1 year, but in a 100-year deal. So he's committed the UK to give £3 billion a year for 100 years. That's £300 billion. I'm sure that's going to be index linked and it will go up as time goes on over the next century. Now, this is an odious pact or commitment. It does nothing for this country or the people of this country. If I got into power with the Heritage Party, we would repudiate that immediately and stop sending money and weapons to the corrupt Zelensky regime. But he's doing all of this while actively demolishing the UK economy and hurting various groups of people, and the groups of people that have actually been affected by Starmer and also Rachel Reeves, his Chancellor, with her budget. Encompasses probably more than half the people in this country, if not a majority, you're kind of getting on for most people in this country. A number of things that he's done. First of all, he's affected pensioners by withdrawing the winter fuel allowance. That's to save apparently £1.5 billion a year, but he's spending double that on Ukraine. Then there's the attack on farmers with this new inheritance tax requirement. So farmers with just an ordinary size farm will have to pay 20% inheritance tax on their land, the value of their land, which means they're going to have to sell vast swathes of their farmland if they inherit a farm from their father that's come down through the generations. So this is going to decimate family farms. And of course, the big globalist corporations like BlackRock are ready to snap up any farms that go bust or go out of business because of these new inheritance tax requirements. And, my position is inheritance tax in total, all inheritance tax is wrong. It needs to be just abolished because you've already paid tax on your earnings in your life. You shouldn't have to pay inheritance tax when you die. Well, you don't pay, effectively the people inheriting your estate pay it from you. So you shouldn't be taxed twice on what you earn and what you build up over your life. You should be able to pass that on to your children through the generations. And that particularly is true of family farms, because if we don't have farmers, we don't have food. No farmers, no food. Keir Starmer doesn't seem to understand that. But he's also imposed a similar tax regime on businesses. So it's not just farms that are going to be taxed with inheritance tax. It's small family businesses. They have imposed or reduced business tax relief on inheritance tax. So the same applies. If you own a small business and you want to pass it on to your children, a family business, then that will be taxed at 20% rate of inheritance tax. And it's even worse because they can't, if you own a shop or something, you can't just sell off a parcel of your land. I mean, that's bad enough for farmers. You have to basically sell the whole business and take all the money out of it to pay the government. So this is going to decimate businesses. And of course, that's going to hurt workers as well, because if businesses go under, the workers that work there are going to find themselves unemployed when a business goes bankrupt. But that's not the only attack on businesses that we've had from Labour. They've increased employers' national insurance by 1.2% and also reduced the threshold at which they have to pay it from a salary of an employee from 9.1 thousand down to £5,000. So employers have to pay national insurance on all earnings for every employee over £5,000, which is almost everybody. It was 9,100. It's going down to 5,000. So for every employee that a business has, the employer will have to pay approximately £800 extra per year in employers' national insurance, which is basically just a tax off their earnings, of their profits, which means a lot of businesses that have small margins will quickly become unprofitable, and this is going to make more businesses that are on the edge, where finances are very delicate, go out of business. And of course, that's going to hurt the workers as well. Workers will find themselves out of a job. So this Labour Party is actually attacking their base, the people who labour, the people who work. It's not a party for the labouring man or labouring woman at all anymore. Of course, they're also attacking private schools completely unnecessarily with a 20% VAT charge on private school fees. Now, I know only 6 or 7% of the population of children go to a private school, but when they do, they take pressure off the state school system because the government, the state, doesn't have to pay for those children's education. That's paid for by the parents. By putting this 20% VAT on private school fees, it's going to make a lot of private schools go out of business, and some already have closed their doors. Not the big ones, not the well-known ones like Eton and Winchester and Harrow, because they actually mostly get foreign students coming in now, or people who have got more money than sense. It doesn't make any difference to people sending their kids to Eton whether the fees are 50,000 or 60,000 because they're multi-millionaires and billionaires. But the smaller private schools that do a really, really good job and are mostly still populated by British children with middle-class families who scrimp and save to pay fees of 10,000 or 15,000 a year. They can't afford an extra 2,000 or 3,000 because they're right at the edge. So they're withdrawing their kids from private schools, putting them in state schools, which obviously is devastating for children with such a huge change coming very suddenly. And also that means that the private schools are not getting the fees, so they have to close. These really valuable small private schools that with lower fees that still serve English children, Scottish, Welsh and Northern Irish children. They're the ones that are suffering. So this really is an attack on British children as well as private schools as a whole, which goes with their communist class war ideology. And of course, the other thing they're doing is attacking landlords. Now, this is a delicate one because, of course, life is difficult for tenants sometimes if you have a bad landlord. But there are many, many good landlords, and they're being hammered by new regulations and new measures coming in under the Labour government. And from what I understand, talking to landlords and landlords groups, a lot of them who are good landlords are selling up because they just simply can't afford to do it anymore, because they know they're not going to be able to sell their homes if they want to. They're not going to be able to get rid of tenants if they're bad, and there are bad tenants in this country, as I'm sure you're aware. I understand that 400,000 landlords have either already sold up or are in the process of selling their properties because they don't want to be landlords anymore, as a direct result of Labour's policies to make life more difficult for landlords to get rid of bad tenants. So, this is actually counterproductive, because if the number of properties available in the private rented sector goes down, then prices go up, and then there's fewer places for people who want to rent, and so life becomes harder for the tenants by putting all these regulations onto the market rather than letting the market be free and actually using the existing powers that are there in order to get rid of bad tenants that may be there and look after good landlords and good tenants. That's just another issue and another thing that they're doing to hammer a certain part of the economy that doesn't get talked about too much. So this pact, an agreement and decision to give £3 billion a year to Ukraine is all the money that they would get from the winter fuel allowance, plus what they're going to get by hammering farmers. They're not going to get anything from the putting VAT on private schools because a lot of kids are going to state school, which is going to use up the money they would have got. So all of those things are completely unnecessary. They didn't need to happen, but he's harming and attacking British people by the million or the tens of millions, taking money from good people who will work hard and spaffing it out the door on Zelensky and Ukraine. It's an odious agreement and it should be repudiated immediately.